This is it, part 5, the conclusion to our fire series. And in our humble opinion, we did in fact save the best for last. And you're about to see us deliver on our promise to show you something you've never seen before when it comes to making fires. Something that answers the age-old question about flint and steel fire method. Is it viable? Is it practical to make a flint and steel fire without any charred materials to catch the spark? And no chaga, no fungi, just rock, steel, spark, and common plant tinders from the wild to catch it. I mean, what if the answer has always been right in front of us? All of that is coming up. Hey, I'm Luke, this is Wilderness Strong, and we're all about bushcraft, nature education, ethnobotany, and wilderness survival. If you're into all that, subscribe and turn on notifications because we've got non-stop content coming on the horizon. Now, with all that said, let's get into this. Did you know there's a great dilemma in the community of wilderness survival and bushcraft when it comes to making fire with flint and steel? Now, we use the term flint for convenience sake here, but we're also talking about any chert, jasper, other quartz-based rocks. You'll even see us using agate and petrified wood from time to time. Anyway, let me do my best to sum up this dilemma. You see, everyone accepts that using charred cloth to catch your spark is extremely effective and by far the most common and easiest way to catch sparks for a flint and steel fire. Also, widely accepted, you can use natural tinders to produce the same result as long as they've been charred first. Now, we agree both strategies work great, and that's why video instruction on these methods are so easy to find. So why would there be any dilemma? Because deep down, experienced bushcrafters and specifically survival experts know that there's one small issue with relying on these methods. And this issue has always bothered us too. To char your cloth and to char your plant tinders, you need a fire. Or in other words, you got to make a fire so you can make a fire. I even read one fire maker sum it up perfect like this. Flint and steel fire method works great for your second fire, but not your first one. What he meant, of course, is that you have to have charred tinder in order to make fire with flint and steel in the first place. But the problem is, what if you don't have char or it got wet, ruined somehow, lost? Can you just use natural raw plant tinder consistently, reliably, to catch and hold the sparks? Well, I combed through every article and video I could find on the subject, and instructional videos and no char success stories, they were not easy to find. In fact, the general consensus from the majority of fire makers was that making a flint and steel fire from natural tinders without any charred material was technically possible, but not recommended, because it wasn't viable or practical. One writer even expressed it as almost impossible, unless you had access to one or two specific types of fungi like chaga, which grow mostly in the northern climates. But we don't have access to any of that where I live, and I couldn't get the words viable and practical out of my head. Now, this in no way is us trying to disparage anyone. I mean, we know as well as anybody how difficult it can be to accomplish a flint and steel fire using natural tinders. I mean, if you got the wrong tinder, the wrong technique, or I guess even the wrong perspective, I can see exactly why this would feel impossible. But our attitude was, hey, if it's possible to do, if it's ever been done without char, there's just got to be a viable, practical way to consistently do it with common plant tinders. No charring. Or as my dad always used to say when I was a kid, where there's a will, there's a way. So we got determined, we got to work, and guess what? There's a way. Several, in fact. First, as expected, we found so many tinders that just do not work. So many we can't even name them all. We tried 48 different variations of tinder in this experiment. Many that we felt very hopeful, even confident about, and they defiantly refused to take a spark over and over and over again. Even the flash tinders like cattail, fireweed, and thistle, they wouldn't even take. Although a few of these flash tinders came so close, so we haven't given up yet, and we still believe it might be possible to get them to light in the future. I kept thinking about Thomas Edison's invention of the light bulb through the whole process, and him rejecting the term failure to describe his 10,000 first attempts at success before he finally succeeded. Like Edison, I didn't see failure, but rather what felt like 10,000 ways to not make a flint and steel fire. Then we had a stroke of inspiration which led to several more, and one amazing, accidental discovery at the end of this video that was certainly divine intervention. But first, check out this footage of our first successful tinder breakthrough. This is dust that we collected from dead stinging nettle stalks. You see, when dead nettles decay and they get broken down by insects like beetles specifically, it leaves behind this incredible fine powder, which seems to have flammable properties that we couldn't find rivaled by any other plant dust. So we broke down the dead nettle fibers and we collected the dust that was left over. Our theory was that this dust, being so fine and powdery, would be more inclined to hold on to a spark compared to more common, less processed tinders that we had seen tried and also tried ourselves. By pounding, splitting, and peeling the dead stalks, we were able to get the dust to drop down where we could scoop it up into our pan. And here we go, the moment of truth. And our nettle dust theory was proven correct. We were consistently able to get sparks to hold up and turn into embers, which were then easily turned into fires. In fact, it worked so well that several times we'd get more than one ember to go, and once it started to smolder, it held and spread with no problem at all. So why is that all exciting? Well, first of all, we have never seen this done with nettle. We have never seen a video or article that reveals stinging nettle dust as a viable option as tinder for flint and steel fire making. And it's not like it just worked one time and then never again. We were successful so many times with it that we are now confident that this nettle dust is a viable and practical method for flint and steel fires. Stinging nettle grows all over the place, and it is not a great undertaking to harvest dead nettle straight from the wild. So the fact that stinging nettle is so common is just another reason that it is such an exciting find. But then we had this crazy idea. What if those flammable properties aren't just in the dust? What if they're in the actual nettle fibers themselves? So we started pounding and peeling dead nettle fibers until we had a nice stretchy nest of tinder. And it was quickly obvious by its texture that there was something different about this tinder. And sure enough, you can actually get the nettle fibers to catch and hold a spark by placing them on top of your flint, the same way you would with a piece of char cloth. We also did this consistently and often under 10 strikes by putting it underneath us and then dropping sparks onto it.
Oh my gosh, look at that.
And now we had some momentum going. We had so many successes with this that it was tempting for me to just show every single one. But I decided to only show enough to establish that this was not a fluke. We pretty much had it to the point where we could do it every single time in just a matter of minutes.
There we go, right there. All right, there we go.
Okay, how about mixing the dust and the tinder nest together? Now, as exciting as all this was, there is something more to this story when it comes to nettle. Something we discovered that absolutely blew me away. I mean, I'm about to show you something that even I can still hardly believe, and I saw it in person. And if you think I might be exaggerating the build-up to this, just keep watching. What would you say if someone told you that you can harvest a live green growing plant and use it for tinder, even just for matches or a ferro rod or whatever? You would probably assume they didn't know very much about making fires. But then they told you that they could take that live green plant and use it to catch a single spark from a flint and steel and turn it into a fire consistently. Well, up until just a couple days ago, I would have known for a fact that that person was completely inexperienced. But all of that is exactly what we did with stinging nettle. We're talking live, green, growing nettles, cut, harvested, dried in the summer sun, consistently, reliably taking sparks from a flint steel. And how long were they dried? Weeks? Days? How about 2 hours? That's how long it took. From the time we cut the nettle to the time we used it for tinder, 2 hours. I mean, imagine if you only had a metal striker in the wild. This means you could get a fire going anytime you have access to both stinging nettle and rocks like quartz, flint, chert, jasper, or agate. We didn't bother nurturing every single ember into flame because we would have burned through all of our tinder. But we did it a few times just so you could see how easy it was to do with this nettle. See, once nettle starts to smolder, it's not going out. And the stinging nettle can actually be green and growing when you harvest it. No charring first. After some careful handling, you just need to remove the leaves and peel off the fibers first. Once they've been peeled and dried in the sun for a couple hours, they'll be ready for pounding and processing. And in many cases, we were getting our green nettle to take and hold a spark in under 10 strikes. Those are the type of results you would expect from charred material, not from recently gathered green nettles. If you look close here, you can see the smoke begin and the embers start to travel and spread through the tinder. Once it gets to this point, we don't worry one bit about whether it's going to keep smoldering. Stinging nettle smolders like no other tinder we've ever seen. This nettle was harvested green as can be, dried for a couple hours, and bam. I never thought I would tell somebody that they can actually use green recently gathered plant tinder for any fire project, let alone flint steel with no charring. Because with the exception of one other plant that we'll show you in a minute, you cannot do this with any other green plants that we know of. That's not to say that they don't exist anywhere in the world, but immediately around us, there were none to be found. And just how flammable was the aged and green stinging nettle fiber? The stretchy, clingy, webby nettle clings to the sparks, so much that it actually became a bit of a nuisance at times when we were trying to quickly put out the embers. It kept reminding me of those trick candles that you put on birthday cakes. I mean, I can honestly say I have never seen any tinder behave like this when it comes to holding an ember. Superior even to cedar, redwood, or any of our favorite smoldering tinders. Put a big rock on top of the whole thing. Cap it. Still going. Check out what happens right here. While we were trying to light up some mulched up willow down, sparks fly across the table and land in a bowl full of nettle. I smelled smoke coming from somewhere, looked down, and this green tinder had grabbed hold of the spark. Absolutely incredible. So we had actually originally planned to make this discovery the climax of the video, with stinging nettle being the main feature. The fact that we found one single common plant that can be used consistently in 3 different forms as a tinder for flint and steel with no charring, that was pretty impressive to us. But then something totally unexpected happened that delayed the release of this video, but it taught us something that we never could have imagined. Watch what happened when we were working on lighting this willow and fireweed down. Something started to smolder behind us. After bouncing off of a shoe first, one spark landed on one leaf and started to actually smolder. This happened after hours and hours of trying to process and light dozens of what we thought were near perfect tinders like cedar, cattail, and even fatwood with no success. So what was going on here? Well, we nurtured this leaf ember into a flame, and then we had to go back and watch the video footage to see what the heck happened. We didn't even know what it was at first. And it turned out to be waterleaf, a dead, dried leaf from the common plant, waterleaf, took a spark without us even trying, so to speak. So imagine how we felt after weeks of studying, experimenting, failing, relentlessly trying to find tinders that would light. And then just by accident, we discovered one. So immediately we tried collecting a bowl full of dead, dried, thin leaves and came so close to getting another spark to hold. Then we remembered the nettle dust, and we examined the texture closely. We kept thinking there's just got to be a way to replicate the texture of that dust with other plant tinders. And as we looked at this Aboriginal style grinding bowl that we made, we were inspired by the way Native Americans would grind food sources into powder that closely resembled this nettle dust. So we gave it a shot with the waterleaf and many other tinders, and we soon discovered that you can grind up and process waterleaf, and it'll absolutely hold a spark consistently, and it certainly deserves to enter into the category of viable and practical. Because like nettle, waterleaf is very common in woodsy areas that get enough moisture in the wet seasons, and if you find stinging nettle, there's some good chance waterleaf is going to be nearby.
Something in two different places, I think. 1, 2, 3, 4.
Stinging nettle got us so excited about making tinder from green plants that we considered for a second that maybe there were several that would work. But it was only waterleaf that was able to replicate what stinging nettle did, this amazing feat of catching an ember while still green. And as always, we had to make sure and have multiple successes with it, so we could officially put it on the list as a viable and practical tinder. You see, to get on this elite list of tinders, you got to be commonly found in the wild in many parts of the world, and also capable of catching and holding a spark consistently without any charring, and waterleaf certainly met that criteria. This discovery got us thinking, well, what other leaves will work? And it turned out, not many. At least, not immediately around us. But in the quest to find more, we did come across yet one other plant that ended up entering the viable, practical club. Meet great burdock. Just the name itself commands respect and suggests viability. These leaves were absolutely incredible when it comes to catching and holding sparks. And you want to talk practical? We didn't even have to smash and grind these leaves. Just a couple minutes of processing in our hands was enough to do the trick. Look how fibrous they are and the way that they stretch, similar to the nettle and almost like a spider web. Over and over, we were able to ignite dried burdock leaves. And just like nettle and waterleaf, great burdock is extremely common. So much so that it's even considered invasive and a nuisance to some. But to us, it's a natural miracle when it comes to fire tinder. So here's my main takeaway from all these experiments. Of course, it's easier to use charred materials than uncharred when it comes to flint and steel. But this was never about finding the easiest way to make a fire. I mean, it's easier to use a ferro rod than to use a flint and steel. And while we're at it, it's even easier to just use matches, or how about a lighter? This wasn't about easy. It was all about education and learning what's possible. And not only possible, but viable, practical, reliable. And I hesitate to say it, but maybe even dependable. I mean, this project took weeks of research, and we examined 48 different variations of tinder. We also estimated that it took a staggering 15,000 to 20,000 strike attempts including a sprained wrist and some bloody knuckles, just for us to figure out which tinders were viable. But once we found them, we were getting them to light consistently, and typically in just 20 strikes or less, including several under 10. Small price to pay for that kind of education. And in waterleaf, burdock, and 3 variations of stinging nettle, we found 3 common plants that absolutely fit that description. We know that most people know that you can use charred materials to catch a spark for a flint and steel fire. We also know that many people are familiar with a couple of specific types of fungi that'll do the same thing. But we hope we've been able to add to the bushcraft community's education when it comes to catching sparks on common natural plant tinders. It's time to put a cap on this fire series, but if you missed any of the parts 1 through 4, you gotta go back and check them out, starting with hand drill fire. And don't forget to subscribe, turn on the notifications, and hit the big thumb to let YouTube know that you like this video. All this makes it possible for more wilderness lovers to see what we're doing and see what they've been missing. As always, thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.